The night air shimmered above the rooftop gala, the city skyline glowing like a silent audience waiting for a show. Soft jazz floated through the air, but the tension at the center table cut through it like a blade. The black man stood beside the VIP table, shoulders steady, face unreadable. His expression carried that calm stillness people develop only after years of being judged before speaking. His eyes drifted over the table sign, then toward the couple seated in his place, two people radiating entitlement without needing to say a word. The woman in the red dress didn't look at him first. She looked through him. That subtle flick of the eyes, dismissive, quick, automatic, was its own kind of slap. She leaned back in her chair, chin raised slightly, lips curled in a practiced smirk that came from years of always being the one with the louder voice, the faster accusations, the social advantage. Her bracelets sparkled as she casually motioned toward him, her body language dripping with a rehearsed kind of superiority. The man beside her didn't move. His posture stayed relaxed, arm resting on the back of his chair, giving her silent permission to speak for both of them. The guests at surrounding tables pretended not to stare, though every pair of eyes pulled toward the confrontation like gravity had shifted. The environment felt too perfect for conflict. Crystal glasses, golden place settings, elegant gowns. Yet beneath that polished surface, social tension rippled like a current under glass. Even the officer standing a few steps behind the black man narrowed his focus, preparing himself for trouble that wasn't there. A quiet heaviness lingered around the protagonist's shoulders, not fear, just the familiar weight of knowing exactly how he was being judged. A man who didn't raise his voice. A man used to standing in rooms where people doubted he belonged. He stayed still. He stayed calm. He waited. But the air shifted the moment the woman leaned forward, breath sharp, eyes narrowing as if she was about to slice him with nothing but her tone. Something ugly was about to unfold, and the first accusation would erupt before anyone even understood who he truly was. The woman in the red dress leaned in with the sharp, deliberate poise of someone who believed the world should rearrange itself for her comfort. Her eyes locked onto the black man's face, not to understand him, but to warn him. Her brows tightened, lips parting in a breath that carried pure disdain before any words even formed. Her body stiffened as if preparing for battle. One hand gripped the edge of the table, the other lifted with slow, theatrical precision. Her manicured finger extended toward him, pointed like a weapon polished by privilege. The gesture alone told the room everything. She saw him not as a guest, not as an equal, but as an unwelcome interruption in her curated evening. Around them, the environment reacted. The glow of city lights, once peaceful, now felt like spotlights on a stage where only humiliation was allowed to speak. Glasses trembled slightly in guests' hands. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, one nervous, the other curious, both silently grateful the spotlight wasn't on them. The atmosphere thickened into something cold and brittle. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter froze. Even the music felt muted, as if ashamed to continue playing. The social tension wrapped around the protagonist like invisible chains. Not because he was intimidated, but because he understood exactly how quickly a situation like this could be twisted. The officer behind him shifted his stance, boots scraping softly against the floor, reinforcing the imbalance in the scene. Authority positioned behind one side of the conflict, not the other. Inside, the black man's thoughts remained steady. Years of holding his composure in rooms like this had trained him to absorb cruelty without letting it break his exterior. His jaw flexed slightly. His breath eased in and out. A quiet internal conflict surfaced, not whether to defend himself, but whether it was even worth speaking. He had walked into this night hoping to stay unnoticed. He should have known that wouldn't be possible. Then the woman's voice sliced through the room, her tone dripping with a confidence that came from always assuming she was right. She didn't soften her volume. She didn't hide her disgust. She didn't hesitate. A verbal blow landed, sharp, humiliating, designed to make him small in front of strangers. Heads turned. A waiter froze mid-step. Even the city skyline outside seemed to pause. And her next gesture would push the entire room from discomfort into outright shock. The woman's chair scraped as she pushed herself forward, her whole body tightening into a confrontational stance. Her eyebrows pulled together, her jaw set hard, and the sharp tilt of her chin announced a single message. She believed she had the right to challenge his presence without question. Her expression radiated certainty, the dangerous kind born from privilege, unchecked and loud. Her arm lifted higher, finger stabbing the air as if she were pointing at a problem that needed removal. The gesture wasn't casual. It was practiced, confident. The kind of motion reserved for scolding staff, correcting servers, or dismissing people she thought beneath her. Her husband nodded subtly beside her, shoulders squared, silently endorsing whatever came next. The crowd sensed the shift instantly. A few guests leaned away, creating just enough distance to signal disapproval without risking involvement. A man in a navy suit adjusted his cufflinks nervously. A woman in pearls held her breath. Small movements, but each one fed the growing tension, each one quietly declaring that they expected the black man to be the one in the wrong. The environment mirrored their unease. The soft glow of candles flickered against polished glass, their reflections trembling with the same uncertainty spreading through the room. The music struggled to fill the silence, fading beneath the weight of anticipation. Even the cold breeze rolling across the rooftop felt heavier, as if it carried the collective judgment of everyone watching. The officer behind the protagonist shifted again, this time placing one hand near his belt, posture firming. It wasn't an overt threat, just enough movement to remind the room who held authority here. The imbalance was undeniable. One man stood alone, calm but isolated, while an entire social structure silently stacked itself against him. Inside, the black man remained steady. His chest rose and fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm. No anger, no fear, just the familiar ache of being misjudged before he even spoke. A small flicker of frustration surfaced beneath the calm, tugging at his patience. Not because he felt powerless, he wasn't, but because he knew where this was headed and he hated how predictable it had become. Then it happened. The woman leaned forward and made a bold, sweeping gesture toward the chair, the one marked VIP, claiming it with the same arrogance she had used to take his dignity moments before. She announced in a cutting tone that he must have wandered into the wrong area, implying he didn't belong in this part of the gala at all. Gasps rippled across the tables, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. A silent verdict began forming around him, but the next action she took wouldn't just insult him, it would ignite the whole rooftop. The woman's face tightened further, cheeks flushed with the thrill of an audience watching her exercise power. Her eyes sharpened, narrowing into slits of irritation, and her lips pressed into a thin, dismissive line before pulling apart in a dramatic exhale. Every inch of her expression broadcasted annoyance, as if his very presence disrupted the perfection of her evening. She rose from her chair with a swift, agitated movement. The fabric of her red dress shimmered under the rooftop lights, catching the attention of nearby guests. Her posture stretched tall and rigid, shoulders thrown back, chest lifted, an unmistakable display meant to dominate the interaction. She stepped closer, ignoring how her heels clicked too loudly on the marble floor, each step punctuating her belief that she owned this space. Her body leaned into his personal space, not aggressively enough for the officer to intervene, but just enough to make the moment feel suffocating. Her hand hovered inches from his chest, not touching but pointedly asserting her superiority. She didn't need physical contact to humiliate him. The intention alone worked. Around them, the environment responded like a stage set, adjusting to rising conflict. The string lights above flickered against the dark sky, casting sharp highlights on tense faces. A server carrying champagne halted mid-path, unsure whether to retreat or observe. Guests straightened in their chairs, backs stiff, eyes drawn to the unfolding drama despite themselves. The atmosphere thickened into a near-visible pressure. Conversations didn't just pause, they evaporated. Even the rooftop breeze seemed to hush, as if unwilling to interrupt the spectacle. All that remained was the heavy stillness of judgment, the kind that comes from people who think they're watching a stranger being corrected, not a person being dehumanized. Social tension coiled around the protagonist like a rope slowly tightening. The officer behind him cleared his throat, a small but telling sound that signaled he was ready to involve himself if the moment escalated. Guests watched him with wary eyes, some curious, others instinctively distrustful. The weight of their assumptions pressed hard against his patience. Inside, the black man felt the old, familiar burn of injustice rise in his chest. A mix of exhaustion and restraint throbbed beneath his calm expression. He wanted to speak, wanted to end the performance, but he held still, breathing slowly through the storm gathering around him. He had walked into enough rooms in life to know that sometimes silence protected a man better than words. Then the woman made her move. She reached out and pulled the VIP sign toward herself, dragging it across the table with a noisy scrape, lifting it high as if presenting evidence of his supposed mistake. The gesture was dramatic, loud, humiliating, designed to turn an ordinary object into a weapon. Gasps scattered through the crowd. The officer straightened. The husband smirked. And in the next moment, she would escalate the situation so far that the entire rooftop would shift from surprise to outrage. The woman held the VIP sign high above her shoulder, her expression sharpening into something triumphant and cruel. Her eyes glimmered with the thrill of public validation. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the quiet humiliation sink in, enjoying the way every face in the room turned toward her. The corner of her lip curled, not quite a smile, but the satisfied twitch of someone convinced she was restoring order. Her posture grew even bolder. She stepped closer to him, angling her body so the sign hovered between them like a verdict. Her shoulders lifted in exaggerated annoyance, the motion sending a shimmer through her dress that demanded attention. Her chin tilted upward as if she were looking down on someone standing 2 floors below her. The husband finally shifted, lifting his arm to rest on the back of the chair with leisurely arrogance. His expression held a smug calm, the kind of relaxed superiority that came from knowing his wife would deliver the scene while he watched from the comfort of entitlement. He didn't rise to confront the man. He didn't have to. She was doing it for both of them. Around them, the environment tightened like a noose. Guests leaned back slightly, not far enough to avoid watching, but just enough to signal that they supported her accusation by default. A man in a gray suit rolled his shoulders awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene. A woman beside him clutched her champagne flute with both hands, knuckles whitening. Even the waitstaff paused, forming a quiet perimeter around the drama they were powerless to interrupt. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the night itself recoiled. The once lively music now pulsed faintly in the background, stripped of its warmth. The breeze that had carried laughter across the rooftop earlier now slipped between people in uneasy drafts. Every element of the space bent toward tension. Social pressure pressed against the protagonist from the front, the sides, the back, everywhere at once. The officer behind him moved a half step forward, enough to ensure his presence was unmistakable. His eyes narrowed, assessing the situation through a lens the man knew too well. Inside, the black man felt a slow churn in his gut. Not fear, just that deep, quiet frustration that came from standing in rooms where assumptions always spoke louder than truth. He inhaled through his nose, shoulders rising slightly before settling again. The urge to defend himself flickered, then cooled. His restraint was its own kind of strength, though it came at a cost. And then the woman escalated. She reached out and tapped the back of the VIP chair, the seat that belonged to him, with a sharp, claiming touch. A gesture dripping with ownership. Then she motioned toward the exit with the other hand, palm open, ordering him silently, publicly to leave. The crowd stiffened. Someone whispered. The husband smirked wider. But her attempt to remove him would trigger an intervention she never expected, and it would expose the first crack in her certainty. The officer behind the black man shifted his weight, the movement subtle but heavy with implication. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked toward the couple as if waiting for some unspoken cue. Then his attention slid back to the protagonist, lingering there with a quiet suspicion that didn't need to be voiced. His expression stayed controlled, but the tension in his brow said enough. He was prepared to act, and everyone could feel it. His body language hardened, shoulders squared, feet planted firmly, one hand resting near his belt, just close enough to his radio to send a message without touching it. The officer didn't speak, but his posture did. He was ready to escort someone out, and the room assumed it wouldn't be the couple in the expensive clothes. The woman noticed. Her expression brightened with a burst of confidence, like fuel had been tossed onto her entitlement. She angled her body toward the officer, one arm extended slightly as if to draw him into the conflict without saying a word. Her eyes glistened with anticipation, the kind people get when they believe authority is about to confirm their bias. The husband leaned back even farther, legs crossed, fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. His expression settled into the relaxed superiority of a man who believed the outcome was guaranteed. He didn't acknowledge the protagonist at all. He didn't need to. His silence was its own form of dismissal. Around them, the environment shifted yet again. A ripple moved through the crowd, tiny motions but unmistakable. People adjusted ties, smoothed dresses, repositioned themselves in chairs. Not because they cared about the conflict, but because tension this strong demanded physical reaction. A waiter slowly backed away from the scene, eyes wide. A group near the bar stopped laughing mid-joke, each person frozen in uneasy anticipation. The atmosphere thickened into something almost suffocating. The city lights seemed dimmer, the rooftop quieter, the night colder. Judgment pooled in the spaces between people, filling the silence with a pressure that made the protagonist's skin prickle. Social tension curved around him like a wall. Every set of eyes held expectation, some cautious, others eager, many simply curious. They weren't seeing a person. They were seeing a scenario, and that was the part that stung deepest. Inside, a familiar ache tugged at his chest. Years of controlling reactions, years of navigating rooms where he'd been doubted, dismissed, underestimated. His inner conflict wasn't about fear. It was about exhaustion. The kind that settled into a man's bones after a lifetime of proving he belonged in places that should never have questioned him. He straightened slightly, not confrontational, just grounded. A calm breath steadied him. The officer interpreted that simple movement as resistance. He stepped forward. A hush swept across the rooftop, and in the space of one breath, the officer's next action would turn a tense scene into a full-blown spectacle. The officer's foot landed beside the black man with a firm, echoing step that cut through the rooftop silence like a warning bell. His face hardened into an official mask, eyes narrowing as he evaluated the situation with the kind of rigid certainty that left no room for nuance. His brows drew together, creating a stern crease that signaled he had already decided who the problem was. He lifted his chin slightly, posture tall and commanding, radiating authority in a space already tilted against the man standing alone. His shoulders locked into place, chest rising in a deep, self-assured breath, as if preparing to carry out a routine removal. He didn't touch the protagonist, but the shift in his stance, one step forward, feet planted wide, made the message unmistakable. The woman in red straightened like she had just won something. Her eyes glowed with vindication, and she placed a hand on her hip with a flourish that announced she believed justice was being served. A smirk played at the corner of her mouth, subtle but poisonous. The husband beside her looked pleased, his posture softening into the lazy confidence of someone who believed the world always bent in his favor. Around them, the environment transformed into a theater. The guests leaned in even further, forming an invisible circle around the unfolding scene. Some whispered behind raised hands, eyes flitting nervously between the officer and the protagonist. Others stared openly, their curiosity overpowering their discomfort. Glasses clinked softly as fingers trembled. The rooftop lights cast sharp reflections across the marble, highlighting the tension etched into every face. The atmosphere thickened with a new kind of pressure, anticipation. People weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. The air felt charged, as if the gala itself held its breath, uncertain of what would come next. Even the distant hum of the city below faded into the background, drowned out by the weight of the moment. Social tension pressed down on the black man like a concrete block. He could feel the officer's expectations, the couple's entitlement, the crowd's unspoken verdict. These were the moments he had lived through too many times, where silence spoke louder than truth, where assumptions outran facts. The ache inside him deepened, internal conflict rising as he fought to remain steady, to choose restraint despite the humiliation unfolding in front of dozens of strangers. His expression remained calm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, an old, tired pain sharpened by the sting of repetition. His body stayed still, only a slow inhale betraying the storm inside. Then the officer did it. He raised a hand, not aggressively but firmly, gesturing for the man to step aside. A quiet command burned behind the motion, the kind meant to direct someone out of a space they didn't belong in. The crowd stiffened. The couple leaned forward. The rooftop froze. And in that frozen second, an unexpected voice from the crowd cut through the tension, shifting the entire dynamic of the night. The voice was small at first. A soft, uncertain sound that didn't match the explosive energy surrounding the confrontation. Yet it slipped through the tension like a crack of light in a sealed room. The guests turned instinctively, eyes widening as they searched for the source. A young woman near the back of the crowd rose halfway from her chair, her expression tight with discomfort. Her eyebrows pinched together, and a nervous tremor pulled at her lips. She looked like someone fighting between fear and conscience, her body leaning forward slightly as if compelled by something she couldn't hold back anymore. Her hands clutched the stem of her glass too tightly, knuckles pale. She swallowed hard, shoulders lifting with the weight of a decision she knew would make her the target of dozens of stares. But she remained standing, her posture shaky but sincere, the kind of stance that didn't seek attention, only fairness. The guests around her shifted in surprise. A man beside her tugged subtly at her sleeve, urging her to sit. Another woman shot her a warning glance, silently pleading with her not to involve herself, but she didn't move. Her gaze was locked on the protagonist, eyes filled with something no one else had shown him tonight: recognition. The environment reacted before the officer did. The lights overhead flickered against the tension, casting shadows that deepened the uncertainty on everyone's faces. The wind swept across the rooftop in a sudden gust, rustling dresses, flipping menus, and carrying the woman's hesitant breath into the stillness. It felt as if the night itself leaned closer, curious about the shift. The atmosphere trembled with subtle rebellion. It wasn't loud or forceful. It was the kind of shift that made people pause mid-thought, unsettled by the realization that someone in the room wasn't following the script of silent compliance. Conversations didn't resume. No one tried to fill the silence. Every person felt the fragile balance teetering. Social tension twisted sharply. The woman's small act of courage placed the spotlight not on the black man, not on the officer, not on the couple, but on the room itself. Her presence forced everyone to confront the discomfort they were pretending not to see. Guests exchanged glances filled with uncertainty. The entitlement that had filled the air a moment ago began to waver. Inside the protagonist, a quiet shift occurred. His expression remained calm, but something softened behind his eyes, surprise mixed with a weary gratitude. He wasn't saved, not yet. But for the first time tonight, he wasn't standing completely alone. His internal conflict settled just a fraction, enough to steady his breath. The officer, taken off guard, turned his head toward the woman. His brows furrowed, not in aggression but in confusion, an unexpected disruption to what he assumed was a straightforward situation. His hand hovered awkwardly near his belt, unsure whether to continue or reassess. The couple reacted instantly. The husband stiffened, annoyance flashing across his face. The woman in red snapped her attention toward the young witness, her expression twisting into irritation, like someone whose performance had been interrupted before the applause. Her fingers curled around the VIP sign, grip tightening. And then the witness spoke again, louder, steadier, challenging the narrative with a trembling courage that made the crowd lean closer. But before she could finish, someone far more influential stepped forward, shifting the balance of power in a way no one saw coming. A sudden ripple moved through the crowd, sharp, decisive, unmistakable. People turned their heads before they even understood why, eyes widening as a man near the front slowly rose from his seat. His face was calm but firm, his expression carved with quiet authority. He didn't glare. He didn't hesitate. He simply stood with a controlled confidence that instantly changed the gravity of the room. His posture was straight, shoulders squared but relaxed, hands resting at his sides with an intentional stillness that commanded attention without a single word. The lighting from above caught the edges of his suit, highlighting the subtle detail of fabric that spoke of influence rather than showmanship. His gaze swept the scene, first the woman in red, then the officer, then the protagonist, and his eyes narrowed just slightly, as if assessing the truth beneath the noise. The crowd reacted immediately. People shifted, some sitting taller, others whispering behind their hands. A couple near the bar recognized him and stiffened. Even the waitstaff straightened instinctively. This wasn't just another guest. His presence carried weight, unspoken, undeniable, enough to interrupt the spiraling humiliation without raising his voice. The environment responded with a sense of recalibration. The rooftop lights glinted off glasses as guests leaned in to see more clearly. The breeze carried a chill that cut through the tension, as if reminding everyone that this night was about to pivot. The city below continued its distant hum, unaware of the shift happening 30 floors above it. The atmosphere tightened in a new way, not oppressive, but charged with anticipation. The kind that precedes truth, exposure, or correction. People sensed that someone who mattered had entered the conflict, not with aggression, but with a quiet certainty that demanded respect. Social tension pivoted abruptly. The couple's confidence faltered, their superiority flickering like a candle touched by wind. The husband's relaxed demeanor snapped into alertness. His posture stiffened, fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. The woman in red faltered for the first time, her eyes darting to the man who had stood. Her expression tightened, not in anger this time, but in uncertainty. Inside the protagonist, something shifted again. He straightened just slightly, the weight on his shoulders easing. His internal conflict didn't vanish, but the presence of someone willing to intervene, someone with influence, sparked a small, controlled spark of relief. His eyes met the new arrivals for a brief moment, and in that instant he recognized something. This man knew him, or at least recognized him. The officer noticed it too. His posture changed, subtle but real. He lowered his hand from his belt, shoulders loosening as he glanced at the rising figure with growing caution. Authority recognized authority, even in silence. Then the man stepped forward, one slow, solid step that landed like a statement. He didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. His presence alone cracked the narrative in half. The crowd leaned in, and when he finally opened his mouth, the first quiet sentence he uttered would unravel the couple's facade faster than anyone expected. The man who stepped forward didn't rush. He allowed the silence to stretch, his expression calm but edged with a seriousness that made the surrounding guests straighten instinctively. His gaze remained fixed on the couple, studying them with a measured intensity that suggested he already knew exactly what was happening, and exactly how flimsy their confidence really was. His face remained composed, but there was a subtle tightening around his eyes, a quiet disappointment settling into the lines of his expression. His jaw shifted once, a small clench that hinted at restrained irritation. He took another slow step toward the table, the movement deliberate, controlled, and heavy with meaning. His body language sharpened into something undeniably authoritative. Shoulders squared, spine straight. Hands relaxed, but with a certainty that made it clear he wasn't afraid of confrontation. He moved with a grounded calm, the kind that comes from years of being listened to without needing to raise his voice. Around him, the environment shifted in response. The rooftop lights seemed to catch on his suit, casting a subtle glow that heightened the contrast between him and the chaos around him. The guests followed his movements with wide, expectant eyes. Even the officer's stance softened, as though gravity itself had tilted toward the new arrival. The atmosphere thickened with a different type of tension, less volatile, more surgical. The air buzzed with the sense that something important was about to surface, something that could rewrite the assumptions filling the room. The soft rustle of dresses, the faint clink of a glass somewhere in the distance, the low hum of music, all of it hung suspended in the space between breaths. Social pressure pivoted sharply. The couple sensed it immediately. The husband's confident posture deflated slightly, his shoulders dipping as confusion flickered across his face. He shot a quick glance at his wife, silently asking if she knew this man. She didn't. Her expression tightened, irritation shifting into unease. Her fingers twitched nervously around the VIP sign she still held. The protagonist watched quietly, his expression steady but alert. His internal conflict eased into something calmer, a guarded hope but not relief. He knew this man, not personally but by reputation, and he understood that the shift unfolding in front of him was no accident. This was someone with knowledge, someone with influence, someone who wasn't afraid to disrupt the performance. The officer's attention snapped fully to the newcomer. His hand dropped away from his belt entirely as his posture softened into something cautious, almost deferential. He took a small step back, giving space he hadn't offered before. Then the man spoke, not loudly, not angrily. Just a calm, controlled sentence, low enough to force the crowd to lean forward, yet sharp enough to slice through the rooftop like a blade. The couple froze, the guests gasped. The humiliation they had thrown onto the protagonist began to fold back toward them. Because the quiet truth he revealed didn't just challenge their assumption, it shattered the foundation of the story they had created. And before they could recover, he followed it with a second sentence, one that made the couple's confidence collapse visibly in front of everyone. The man's words hung in the air like a quiet detonation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He simply let the truth settle, watching the realization ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. His expression remained firm, his brows slightly drawn together in controlled disappointment. The muscles in his jaw tightened once, a precise movement that revealed how deeply the situation bothered him. He took another small step forward, not aggressive, but decisive, anchored in a confidence that made it clear he was done watching the humiliation unfold. His body language radiated authority without theatrics. Shoulders set, chin held level, hands relaxed at his sides, but with a steadiness that signaled he was accustomed to commanding rooms exactly like this one. He carried himself not like a guest, but like someone who had arrived to correct a problem. Around him, the environment reacted in subtle crisis. The rooftop lights glinted sharply against the silverware, as if even the fixtures felt the shift. Conversations had long died, but now the silence deepened, thickening into something suffocating. A waiter near the back nearly dropped a tray, catching it at the last second with trembling fingers. Several guests leaned back as if distancing themselves from the couple. Others leaned forward, eager to witness the unraveling. The atmosphere took on the charged quality of thunder gathering above a city, heavy, electric, expectant. The social tension reversed direction, no longer bearing down on the black man, but pressing hard against the couple like a tidal wave turning back on itself. The husband's face drained first. His eyebrows twitched upward in disbelief, then darted toward his wife as if hoping she had some explanation, some defense. She didn't. A crack formed in her expression, a flicker of panic that slipped through her polished confidence. The hand holding the VIP sign trembled faintly before she steadied it. She tried to assemble her composure, but her body betrayed her, shoulders tightening, lips parting in a breath that wasn't as steady as she wished. Her eyes darted between the newcomer and the protagonist, confusion tangled with dread. Inside the protagonist, a quiet shift pulsed through him. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just a slow easing of something heavy that had been pressing against his chest for too long. His expression remained calm, but the faint tension around his eyes softened. He wasn't free yet, not from judgment, not from the moment, but the balance had finally begun to shift. The officer, sensing the change in hierarchy, straightened in a different way, less authoritative, more alert. He took a step backward, subtly repositioning himself closer to the crowd than the confrontation itself. His posture loosened, his certainty shaken, his judgment clearly reconsidering what he'd assumed. The man in front finally delivered the second sentence. It was quiet, measured, undeniable, and it carried an authority that made the couple's facade crumble visibly in the space of a heartbeat. The husband's mouth fell open. The woman blinked rapidly, shock rippling across her face. The VIP sign slipped slightly in her grip, because the truth he revealed didn't just undermine their accusation. It exposed exactly how far out of their depth they were. And just as the couple struggled to recover, the newcomer stepped aside, revealing someone behind him whose presence would completely destroy their illusion of control. A collective shiver moved through the rooftop as the man shifted to the side, his deliberate motion revealing a second figure standing just behind him. The guests reacted instantly, spines straightening, heads tilting, eyes widening, as if the entire room had sensed something powerful before they even saw it. The woman in red froze mid-breath. Her confident posture faltered, shoulders dipping the slightest bit as her gaze locked onto the figure emerging from behind the first intervening guest. Her mouth parted in a small, involuntary gasp she tried to hide. The husband's reaction was sharper. His hands gripped the edge of his chair, fingers whitening. The new figure stepped into the light with a presence that didn't need words to assert itself. His face held a calm authority, carved with the expression of someone accustomed to making decisions that moved money, people, and entire departments. His eyes held a sharp intelligence, the kind that absorbed an entire room in seconds. A small furrow appeared between his brows, not anger but disappointment that ran far deeper. His posture was unmistakably commanding. Shoulders firm, jaw steady, hands clasped loosely behind his back in a stance that radiated power without a hint of aggression. He represented the type of authority that didn't have to remind others who he was. The room simply recognized it. Around them, the environment shifted dramatically. The rooftop lights caught the contours of his suit, illuminating the subtle, refined stitching that marked quiet wealth. The city skyline behind him framed him like a portrait, tall, strong, immovable. Even the breeze slowed as if unwilling to interrupt his entrance. The atmosphere turned dense, pressing down on every guest in a heavy silence that demanded attention. The murmurs stopped entirely. Not a single glass clinked. The music faded into the background as though it realized it no longer had relevance in the moment unfolding. Social tension swung fully away from the protagonist and crashed squarely onto the couple. Their confidence, once inflated by entitlement, now wavered under the weight of someone who clearly outranked every assumption they had made. Inside the black man, a quiet recognition flickered. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something deep inside him steadied. He felt the weight on his chest loosen, his internal conflict calming in the presence of someone who knew him, and more importantly, someone who respected him. The officer sensed it too. His posture shifted into formal restraint. He squared his feet, straightened his shoulders, and lowered his gaze, instinctively acknowledging the hierarchy he had failed to recognize moments earlier. Authority recognized authority, and this new arrival radiated it effortlessly. The couple's faces told the story. The husband's brows lifted in anxious confusion. The woman in red swallowed hard, her earlier boldness shrinking into something fragile. Her grip on the VIP sign weakened, the corner of the card digging into her palm unnoticed. And then the man who had just stepped forward spoke. Only a few quiet words, but they carried enough weight to make half the room stiffen. His tone was low, measured, controlled, but each syllable pressed on the couple like a verdict being read aloud. The guests watched with bated breath. The couple's illusion of superiority hung by a thin thread. And in the next breath, the newcomer reached into his jacket, revealing something that would shatter the couple's confidence beyond repair. The newcomer's hand moved slowly toward the inside of his jacket, the motion smooth and deliberate, nothing rushed, nothing nervous. His expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed on the couple with a level, steady disappointment that felt sharper than anger. Even before he revealed anything, the gesture alone sent a tremor through the rooftop. The woman in red stiffened, her shoulders locked, her breath hitched silently in her throat. Her eyes tracked the movement with growing dread, her face tightening into a strained stillness. She didn't blink, she didn't breathe. She simply stared at his hand, as if the future of her reputation hung on the object he was about to reveal. Her husband reacted with a sudden, jarring shift. He leaned forward, not confidently this time, but in panic. His hands braced against the table, knuckles white, lips pressed into a thin, fearful line. His entire posture collapsed inward, the polished arrogance melting into raw uncertainty. The newcomer pulled out a slim leather folio. Clean, minimal, unmistakably official. Its surface reflected the rooftop lights, gleaming with quiet authority. He held it not like a threat, but like a truth waiting to be placed where it belonged. The crowd inhaled collectively. The environment froze. The soft clinking of cutlery earlier was gone. The laughter from distant tables was gone. Even the rooftop breeze seemed to stop mid-movement, hanging in the air like suspended judgment. Guests leaned in, eyes wide with expectation. Some exchanged panicked glances, recognizing what a document like that might hold. Others watched with quiet dread, knowing this wasn't the type of moment a person could recover from easily. The atmosphere tightened around the VIP table like a vice. Every second felt stretched, heavy with inevitability. The city lights glimmered off wine glasses, casting sharp reflections that cut across the scene like fractured tension. Social pressure crashed toward the couple with seismic force. Their earlier confidence, fueled by entitlement and assumption, collapsed visibly. The woman's hand trembled around the VIP sign she still clutched like a shield too flimsy to protect her. Her eyes darted from the folio to the protagonist, a bleak realization beginning to spread across her expression. Inside the black man, a deep exhale slipped through him, controlled, quiet, almost imperceptible. It wasn't relief. Not yet, but the suffocating weight on his chest loosened slightly. Something within him steadied as he watched the truth unfold in front of an audience that had judged him so quickly. His expression remained calm, but the tension in his shoulders eased. He knew exactly what was in that folio. He knew what it meant. And he knew the moment of exposure was no longer approaching, it had arrived. The officer felt it too. He straightened fully, his posture shifting from enforcement to caution. His eyes lowered, and his stance angled slightly away from the couple, subtly distancing himself from the wrong side of the confrontation. Then the newcomer opened the folio. A single document rested inside, clean, stamped, undeniably official, and he lifted it between two fingers, holding it just high enough for the couple and nearest guests to see. Their faces drained instantly. His voice followed, calm, measured, unforgiving, and the title printed across the document was unmistakable to anyone who had ever worked with real money. It was the primary investor agreement for the Gala's sponsoring company. The name printed at the top, prominently, boldly, matched the black man standing silently beside the table. The couple stared, paralyzed by the truth. And while the crowd struggled to process what they were seeing, the newcomer turned the page, revealing a second document that would hit even harder. The newcomer flipped the page with a slow, deliberate motion. The soft rustle of paper cut through the silence like a blade. His expression didn't shift, still calm, still controlled. But there was a precision to the gesture that made the couple flinch before they even saw what was coming next. The woman in red's face tightened into a rigid mask. Her eyes darted anxiously between the document and the protagonist, panic beginning to leak through the cracks of her confidence. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find a single word that wouldn't make everything worse. Her shoulders pulled inward, her once bold posture collapsing under the weight of exposure. Her husband's reaction was sharper, more desperate. He leaned forward abruptly, hands gripping the table so tightly the veins in his forearms strained. His eyes widened, an unmistakable fear blooming behind them. He wasn't confused anymore. He was terrified of what the next page meant, not just for the scene, but for his own reputation. The newcomer angled the second document forward. Its heavy watermark caught the rooftop lights, casting a faint shimmer across the table. Anyone close enough could see the header, Internal Compliance Report, a document used only for high-level oversight, the type of paperwork that could end partnerships, revoke privileges, or permanently stain names. The crowd reacted instantly. A ripple of shock spread across the rooftop. Several guests gasped softly. One woman covered her mouth. A man near the bar muttered under his breath, disbelief etched into his face. The environment seemed to lean in, the rooftop lights casting more dramatic shadows across the table as if spotlighting the unraveling. The skyline behind them glittered, a stark contrast to the tension gripping the party. Even the breeze returned, colder, sharper, brushing against the couple like a reminder of the consequences closing in. The atmosphere thickened with a heavy, suffocating certainty. This wasn't simply a misunderstanding anymore. This was a public reckoning playing out in real time. The guests weren't watching a conflict, they were witnessing a collapse. Social pressure surged and pressed directly onto the couple with crushing force. Their earlier bravado shriveled into something brittle and panicked. Eyes from every direction pinned them down, judgmental, disappointed, curious, unforgiving. Inside the protagonist, the old ache softened into something steadier. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. His expression stayed calm, even gentle, as if he carried no desire to embarrass anyone, but no intention of shielding them from consequences either. The tension in his shoulders eased, but his posture remained grounded. Years of silent endurance had taught him how to hold himself when truth finally rose to the surface. The officer's reaction was immediate and telling. His spine straightened. His eyes widened. He stepped fully back from the protagonist, repositioning himself several feet away in a clear gesture of correction. Authority had shifted, and he acknowledged it wordlessly. The newcomer finally spoke again, still low, still measured. A statement, not an accusation. The second document contained the couple's names and the compliance note beside them. It referenced a prior warning about inappropriate behavior at sponsored events. The couple's faces crumbled. The wife's breath caught in her throat, her hand trembling so violently that the VIP sign slipped from her fingers and landed on the table with a soft but damning thud. The husband's shoulders collapsed. The confidence that filled him earlier vanished, leaving behind the hollow expression of a man realizing he had just humiliated the wrong person in front of the worst possible audience. And before they could apologize or run, the newcomer stepped aside again, revealing the one person whose voice could end everything for them with a single sentence. A new silhouette emerged from behind the newcomer, moving with a quiet certainty that instantly shifted the weight of the rooftop. Guests who recognized the figure reacted first, eyes widening, postures straightening, breaths catching midair. A hush rippled across the tables as if the night itself bowed in acknowledgement. The black man lifted his gaze slowly, his expression steady but aware. He knew this presence, not because he needed protection, but because this was someone whose voice carried an authority that settled disputes at the highest levels. The figure stepped fully into view. A woman, poised, composed, and layered in an elegance that didn't shout wealth but whispered influence. Her face carried a calm severity, not hostile, not emotional, but deeply controlled. Her eyes sharpened as they settled on the couple, her expression reflecting the precise moment she understood exactly what had happened here. Her posture was impeccable, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, hands loosely clasped in front of her, a stance that radiated expectation, accountability, and razor-sharp awareness. The couple reacted instantly. The wife's chin jerked upward, but not in confidence. In fear, her pupils dilated, her breathing quick and shallow. She clasped her trembling hands together, as if trying to rebuild the authority she had weaponized only moments ago. The husband leaned back sharply, swallowing hard. His legs pulled slightly under him, the instinctive posture of a man trying to shrink from a blow he couldn't dodge. His face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and panic. Around them, the environment responded as though the rooftop had grown smaller. Lights dimmed softly behind the dramatic glow cast over the table. Shadows stretched across the marble floor, accentuating every nervous twitch. Even the skyline seemed to recede, focusing all attention on the unfolding reckoning. The atmosphere thickened into something tense but unnervingly quiet. There were no more whispers, no coughs, no distractions. The entire gala seemed to freeze mid-breath, waiting for the newcomer's voice to slice through the silence. Social tension crushed the couple with a force far heavier than earlier judgment. They were no longer facing the room. They were facing someone who held real consequences in her hands. Someone who wasn't swayed by theatrics or entitlement. Someone who had every right to intervene. Inside the protagonist, something subtle shifted. The tightness in his chest released, replaced with a calm clarity born from truth finally taking its rightful place. His internal conflict eased further. His stillness now carried weight, recognition rather than restraint. The officer kept his distance now, standing rigidly at the edge of the gathering like someone hoping invisibility could undo his earlier assumptions. His hands folded behind his back in a stance of quiet correction. The woman in red inhaled shakily, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. But the arriving figure raised a single hand, silencing her effortlessly. Then she leaned slightly forward, eyes steady, tone soft yet cutting, a whisper of authority that carried across the entire rooftop. And in one quiet sentence, she revealed a truth that detonated the couple's remaining confidence. She was the chief financial officer of the company hosting the gala. And the man they humiliated wasn't just an investor. He was the majority stakeholder whose approval directly affected their contracts, opportunities, and future. The couple went pale. And just as their world began to collapse, the CFO delivered the instruction that would determine whether they walked out of the gala or were escorted out instead. The CFO's gaze lingered on the couple with a stillness that felt sharper than anger. Her eyes didn't widen or narrow. They simply observed, absorbing every flinch, every tremble, every scrap of collapsing arrogance. Her expression was a quiet mirror, reflecting exactly what they had shown tonight. Entitlement, cruelty, and reckless confidence built on sand. She straightened a fraction. Not enough to seem dramatic, just enough to signal that her next words would carry weight. Her face remained composed, but a subtle tightening around her mouth revealed how deeply disappointed she was. Not in a loud, emotional way. In a way that suggested she had seen this pattern before and was tired of cleaning up the mess it caused. Her posture shifted into a stance of full authority, feet grounded, shoulders aligned, hands resting behind her back with deliberate precision. The woman in red wilted under the gaze. Her breathing quickened, her cheeks flushing with the heat of shame. Her fingers curled into her palms, nails digging into skin as she tried to hold herself together. Her eyes darted around the rooftop, searching for support she no longer had. Her husband appeared even worse. His shoulders hunched, his jaw quivered, and for the first time all night, his eyes dropped to the floor, unable to face the consequences gathering around him. Around them, the environment continued tightening like a curtain closing on a failed performance. Shadows deepened under the warm rooftop lights. Reflections shimmered across wine glasses with cold precision. Even the city's skyline seemed distant now, like the world had stepped back to watch judgment unfold. The atmosphere pulsed with a heavy, ominous tension. Guests leaned farther into their chairs, unable to look away. A waiter froze mid-step near the edge of the scene, tray trembling in his hands. A couple near the bar whispered sharply, their eyes wide with disbelief. Social pressure wrapped around the couple like iron bands. The humiliation they intended for the protagonist now crushed them with 3 times the weight. They weren't simply embarrassed, they were exposed. Completely, irrevocably exposed. Inside the black man, a quiet transformation settled in. Not vengeance, not triumph, just relief. Relief that he no longer had to hold his breath in a room that misjudged him at first glance. Relief that someone with real influence had chosen to speak. Relief that truth was doing what silence never could. He stood still, posture calm and unwavering. Years of swallowing indignities had taught him control, but now that control had shifted into quiet strength. The officer, realizing how deeply he had misread the situation, straightened stiffly. He moved farther back, adopting a posture that bordered on apology without uttering a single word. His eyes lowered, the earlier confidence replaced with unease. Then the CFO finally spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It flowed, steady, precise, unmistakably final. She requested that the couple stand. A simple instruction, spoken gently. But it carried the weight of an executive order that had ended careers before. The couple froze. The woman's breath trembled. The husband swallowed hard, sweat pooling at his temples. They knew what standing meant. Standing was not compliance. It was surrender. And slowly, shakily, they pushed themselves out of their seats. The entire rooftop watched, breath held. And as soon as they stood, the CFO turned toward the protagonist, preparing to reveal something about him that would leave the entire gala stunned into silence. The CFO turned from the trembling couple and shifted her attention toward the black man who had endured the entire storm in silence. Her expression softened, not with pity, but with a quiet respect that reshaped the atmosphere in an instant. The tension in her face eased, and a subtle warmth touched her eyes, the kind reserved for those whose value speaks louder than their voice ever needs to. She took one slow step closer to him, her posture steady and formal. Shoulders aligned, chin level, hands relaxed at her sides. Every movement carried intention. Her presence beside him drew the attention of every guest like a magnet. The couple stared in dread, their humiliation deepening with each passing second. The rooftop seemed to lean inward, the lights casting a gentle highlight across the protagonist's composed face. His expression remained calm, but a faint shift pulled across his features, something quiet and human, not pride, not victory, just a gentle easing inside him, the kind that comes when truth finally begins to rise after sinking under layers of assumption. He inhaled slowly, shoulders lifting with the breath, then settling again. A lifetime of holding still in hostile rooms had prepared him for this moment, but nothing could prepare the room for what the CFO was about to reveal. Around them, the environment reflected the shift. The string lights overhead glimmered more warmly. The city skyline behind them softened into a dramatic backdrop. Even the wind seemed to pause out of respect. The atmosphere changed entirely. What had once been tight with accusation was now charged with revelation. A collective anticipation pressed through the rooftop, making hearts beat faster, breaths hitch, and glasses tremble in guests' hands. Social tension reversed so completely that the couple shrank in their place, shoulders bending under the weight of their own actions. They clung to each other instinctively, not out of unity, out of fear. Inside the protagonist, something stirred deeper than relief. A quiet ache, not from the humiliation itself, but from the fact that it took documents and titles for the room to reconsider him. His internal conflict settled into a bittersweet awareness. Justice was unfolding, but its path had been far too familiar. Still, he stood tall, silent, grounded. The CFO finally turned fully toward the guests, lifting her chin with controlled authority. She raised a hand slightly, commanding the room with the calm of someone who doesn't need volume to make herself heard. Then she explained who the man truly was. Her words were soft, almost gentle, but each one struck with the force of truth. He wasn't simply a majority stakeholder. He wasn't simply the event's financial backbone. He wasn't simply the largest investor. He was the lead architect of the foundation funding the entire philanthropic arm of the company. The very reason this gala existed, the reason every guest was here, the reason every sponsorship, every partnership, every contract had taken shape. A stunned silence swept across the rooftop. The couple's faces drained to ash. A waiter dropped a napkin, frozen in place. A guest near the bar covered her mouth, eyes wide. The officer's posture collapsed into stiff embarrassment. The protagonist didn't move, he didn't gloat, he didn't even blink. He simply absorbed the room's shift with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through the worst moments of the night. And as the truth settled over the gala like a final verdict, the CFO turned back to the couple, ready to deliver the consequence they could no longer escape. The CFO faced the couple again, her expression calm but sharpened by a clarity that cut deeper than anger ever could. Her eyes settled on them with a stillness that made the rooftop feel smaller, tighter, almost airless. She didn't need raised brows or narrowed eyes. Her disappointment alone was enough to make their legs tremble. She took one slow step toward them, her posture straightening into a stance that radiated unshakable control. Shoulders aligned, chin level, hands folded neatly at her waist. Her presence felt less like a reprimand and more like a verdict. The woman in red's face drained to gray. Her eyes fluttered rapidly, pupils shrinking as she fought to maintain composure. Her hands twisted together in front of her, fingers trembling violently. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by raw panic she no longer had the strength to hide. Her husband's collapse was even more visible. His shoulders caved inward. His mouth quivered. His gaze darted desperately between the CFO, the protagonist, and the documents on the table. He looked like a man watching the floor's last support beam crack beneath him. Around them, the environment vibrated with a quiet, palpable intensity. The rooftop lights cast long shadows behind the couple, stretching across the marble like the outline of their downfall. Guests leaned forward in their seats, unable to tear their eyes away. The music faded into an afterthought, drowned beneath the thick hum of anticipation. The atmosphere took on the quality of a courtroom, cold, quiet, waiting. Social pressure crushed the couple from every direction. Where they once held the room's attention with entitlement, they now held it with disgrace. Whispers rippled through the crowd in soft, sharp waves. Faces that once looked impressed or neutral now stared at them with open contempt. Inside the protagonist, a new stillness took root. Not relief this time, something deeper. A calm acceptance that his silence had carried him exactly as far as it needed to. The ache in his chest, born from a lifetime of moments like this, softened into something steadier. He didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for him. The officer, now pale and rigid, folded his hands behind his back. His earlier certainty had shattered. He stood respectfully distant, posture quietly apologetic without a single word being spoken. The CFO finally exhaled a breath that seemed to echo through the rooftop. Then she delivered the consequences. Her voice was low, measured, unmistakably final. The couple's invitation to future events, revoked, effective immediately. Their sponsorship privileges, suspended pending review. Their ongoing contracts with the company, under investigation for termination. The wife wobbled as if her knees might give out. The husband's jaw dropped in silent horror. But the CFO wasn't finished. She delivered one more consequence, one that struck harder than all the rest. The couple was ordered to apologize publicly to the man they had humiliated. Not in private, not quietly, right here. In front of every guest. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The couple's faces twisted with dread. The protagonist remained still, grounded, unmoved. And then the CFO stepped aside, leaving the couple exposed before the man whose dignity they had tried to strip. And as the couple prepared to speak, the protagonist finally shifted, ready to respond in a way no one in the room expected. The couple stood frozen, trembling before the man they had tried to diminish. Their eyes held the frantic look of people watching their carefully constructed world collapse in slow motion. The wife clutched her hands together so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her breath shallow and uneven. The husband's posture buckled entirely, shoulders drooping, chin tucked, his confidence reduced to dust on the marble floor. All eyes shifted to the black man. His expression remained unreadable at first. Calm, composed, steady, yet something had changed. The tension that once clung to his shoulders had dissolved, replaced by a quiet strength that radiated through every part of him. His face softened, not with forgiveness, but with clarity. He didn't move quickly. He didn't straighten dramatically. He didn't look away in contempt. He simply took one slow step forward. The movement was small, but it carried a weight that silenced even the faintest whisper. Guests leaned forward instinctively. The rooftop lights cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the subtle rise and fall of his breath. His eyes lifted to meet the couple's, and the moment stretched into a long, tense thread. His body language held no aggression, no hostility. Shoulders relaxed, jaw unclenched, hands resting calmly at his sides. He looked like a man rooted in years of restraint, years of understanding exactly how power works, and years of enduring rooms designed to misjudge him. Around him, the environment echoed his stillness. The breeze softened into a quiet hush. Champagne glasses glimmered faintly under the lights. The skyline stretched behind him like a backdrop for a man finally stepping into full visibility. The atmosphere shifted from judgment to anticipation, deep, breath-held anticipation. Not for punishment, not for revenge, for truth. Social tension wrapped around the rooftop with crushing force. The couple could hardly breathe beneath it. Their eyes shimmered with a mixture of regret, fear, and disbelief. Their posture screamed collapse. Inside the protagonist, the ache that had been building all evening surfaced fully. Not anger, not triumph, just sorrow. Sorrow that this moment, this revelation, was the only way people saw him. Sorrow that dignity had to be proven. Sorrow that he had become accustomed to standing alone under suspicion. But beneath that sorrow was something far more powerful. Clarity, strength, authority. He inhaled slowly, steadying the tremor in his chest. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke. He didn't address the crowd. He didn't scold the couple. He didn't demand anything. He simply explained in the calmest possible way that this wasn't about contracts or investment or influence. It was about respect. A respect he had earned long before tonight. A respect he carried with him regardless of how anyone else treated him. His words were soft, almost gentle, yet they struck the room harder than any reprimand could have. Guests felt their hearts tighten, heads lowered in shame. The atmosphere thickened with the weight of reflection. The couple stared at him, stunned. His refusal to return cruelty with cruelty left them exposed in a far more devastating way than punishment ever could. And when he finished speaking, he stepped aside, not as a retreat, but as a declaration that the night no longer belonged to humiliation, but to truth. The CFO's expression softened with approval. The officer looked at the floor, guilt etched across his posture. The crowd watched him with a new kind of reverence. But the moment wasn't over. As the couple prepared to deliver their apology, a sudden shift moved through the rooftop. Someone else had stepped forward, carrying a final revelation that would transform the entire night. And in the next breath, a voice from the gala's organizers revealed a twist that would change not just the couple's fate, but the future of the entire event. A new movement stirred at the edge of the rooftop, quiet at first, but carried with a purpose that made the guests shift in their seats. A senior member of the gala committee stepped forward, an older man with silver at his temples and a posture carved from years of responsibility. His expression was solemn, eyes fixed on the protagonist with something like remorse woven into the lines of his face. He paused beside the CFO before addressing the room. His breathing was steady, but his shoulders held a heaviness that suggested he had been fighting an internal conflict long before tonight. His gaze flicked briefly toward the couple, then returned to the protagonist with a seriousness that quieted even the faint rustle of dresses and suits. His expression tightened with humility as he lifted a small folder from under his arm. The edges were crisp, the seal unbroken. The rooftop lights glinted faintly off the embossed crest on the cover, hinting at its importance. His fingers brushed the surface for a moment, hesitating before he finally stepped forward to speak. The couple tensed, their breathing quickened. Their eyes locked onto the folder as if it might contain the final blow they feared most. The protagonist watched calmly, shoulders relaxed, his internal conflict easing into a settled quiet. His face showed no anticipation, no hunger for victory, only a patient, grounded stillness. Years of endurance had carved that stillness into him, and now it held the entire rooftop without a single word. Around them, the environment reflected the mounting tension. The lights above flickered softly, casting elongated shadows across the marble floor. The city skyline glittered behind the scene, cold and sharp, as if bearing witness. Even the wind seemed to move with intention, swirling around the table in a cool, trembling draft. The atmosphere thickened with a gravity that made hearts pound and breaths shorten. No one shifted. No one whispered. The weight of the moment pressed on every shoulder. The committee member opened the folder, and the final twist unfolded. Inside, it was the new allocation charter for next year's philanthropic expansion, the biggest initiative the company had ever planned. Dozens of partners had competed for it. Many in the crowd had hoped to be included. Contracts worth millions hung in the balance. He announced that the entire project, the funding, the oversight, the direction was being placed under the leadership of the man the couple had humiliated. A stunned silence dropped over the rooftop. The couple's faces crumbled completely. The wife's knees buckled. The husband's mouth hung open in faint shock as if the air itself had betrayed him. But the twist wasn't over. The committee member read the final line in the charter. A line added just that afternoon. Any partner involved in misconduct or disrespect toward the foundation's leadership would be disqualified from participation for a minimum of 3 years. The crowd exhaled in disbelief. It was a clean, permanent consequence. No loopholes, no negotiations, no saving face. The couple broke. The wife lifted trembling hands to her face. The husband sagged into his chair, shoulders folding inward. Their reputations, already damaged, now carried a public mark that would follow them far beyond the gala. Social tension reached its peak. Guests murmured in shock. Some nodded in approval. Others avoided the couple entirely, unwilling to be seen standing near them. And then, finally, the protagonist stepped forward. His expression was calm, eyes steady, breath level. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He carried himself with the same dignity he held when the night first tried to crush him. He thanked the committee member and the CFO with a quiet nod, then turned toward the couple. Not to shame them, not to retaliate, but to close the moment with the grace they had never shown him. His voice was soft, low enough that the crowd leaned in to hear. He said that respect should never be contingent on status, that humanity mattered more than contracts, more than money, more than titles. His words settled into the rooftop like a quiet, powerful chord. The couple lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. The officer stepped back farther still, guilt written in every line of his posture. Guests watched in stunned admiration, seeing the man for who he truly was. Not just an investor, not just a leader, but someone whose strength came from character, not wealth. And as the night drew to its final moments, the protagonist walked away from the VIP table. Not alone, not diminished, but followed by the respect of an entire room that finally saw him clearly. The final shot of the evening belonged to him, a man standing tall against a skyline that had once looked down on him, now rising with him instead. And long after the gala ended, the story of the night, the humiliation, the truth, the collapse, spread far beyond the rooftop, reshaping reputations forever.